Hi guys, and welcome to another chapter in the Masterwoodsman Series. In this episode we're going to be talking about the heavy knife, the heavy chopper. Now in this knife section we've talked about the small knife, the small detail knife that you're going to have for the small work, like the pocket knives, the small precision knives. The next step up, we went to the belt knives, and that was the general purpose knife that's going to do the vast majority of what we're doing. Now we're going to step up to that next size of heavy lifting, so to speak. Now, this is one of those gray areas, and it depends on your environment. If you're out west, where the vast majority of what you're going to be using to build a fire is going to be scrub and brush and mesquite and stuff like that, a heavy knife will work just fine. Those of you that are up north where you're in the cold country, you're going to need an axe or a heavy saw, because you can't pick stuff up off the ground. It's under snow, and so you got to snap off limbs, sometimes forearm thick limbs, and that's going to require chopping or sawing ability. Now we're going to deal with saws in the next episode, but in this one we're going to cover the heavy chopping knife. Now it can be just a belt knife that's a little thicker. Okay, now for example, this is a WCSK. Now notice it's got a nice thick spine on it. It's a little bit heavier, and it's made to be a one tool, a survival tool, a chopper. Now the Tom Brown Tracker is another type of heavy chopping knife. Okay, and what this is good for is shelter building and things like that, and processing firewood and stuff for the fire. It's heavy enough to actually chop, say, wrist-sized stuff and bring it down for shelter building, and yet it's still light enough to use as a knife. Okay, there are other models out there like the Rat 7s and things like the big thick knives, or that kind of heavy chopping knife, because they're doing the job as a knife, and they're also doing the job of a light axe, a machete, a tomahawk, something like that, where you're in the transition right here where it's not really the small knife's job and it's not really the big chopper's job. It's that gray area in between. So to save weight, rather than me carrying a plethora of things, I may opt just tote a large heavy knife as opposed to also toting a chopping tool, and do all of my work with one heavy knife. Very viable. Now let's touch on the thing that everybody, the gorilla in the room, everybody's going to ask about, and that is batoning. I personally don't like to baton because it's putting stresses onto the knife, no matter the quality of the knife, whoever makes it. And so whenever you put it up there and you're beating on this knife, what you're doing is actually compressing the fibers of the steel. And over time, at point X, those fibers are going to become compressed and therefore brittle. And at point X, you're going to whack, ting, and it's going to snap in half. And you see this time and time again with these people that, oh, my knife can die, and they're beating through the gnarliest old stuff that really you should be using an axe for that. And yet they're trying to prove they can do it with their knife. And then a year from now, or a year and a half from now, they got a different knife. But what happened to the such and such knife? Oh, they got kind of quiet about it, don't they? There's a reason. Most of the time they'll break, or the edge will pop out, or something like that, because you're compressing the fibers of the steel and therefore making it brittle. Now, why doesn't a thing like a hammer do that? It's steel, right? Different kinds of steel. Sorry about the aircraft. It's different kinds of steel, and the steel that's used for hammers and things have things mixed in with it to make it that kind of tough, that kind of hard, but it won't hold an edge for crap, so you can't make a knife out of it and it work. And by making a piece of steel that tough, that hard, so it can take the abuse of pounding on steel, nails and stuff like that, for years and years and years, you'd think, well, why can't they make a knife out of it? It can't be made thin. It'll pop out, it's too brittle. So if you took a hammer and you ground it down as thin as a knife blade and hit it, it'll shatter like it's glass. Its mass is what makes it. And that's one of the reasons you see these knives that are advertised as being great, batoning knives. They're thick. There's a reason they're thick. They need that spine, they need that meat, so they don't go brittle quick and snap easily. Okay? So, we've scaled up from the belt knife, and we've now gone to the larger chopping knife. Something like this would be perfectly fine for building shelters and things like that. A good weight, a good size. Now you want a good size handle that fills the hand, less hot spots. A small handle does not do good for a chopping knife because you need to spread that stress of the impact over the hand so it doesn't fatigue the hand. If your hand starts going numb, you're going to get stupid with it. You're going to hit and it's going to roll right out of your grip and become dangerous. So chopping is not a great idea, but if you have to chop, get a nice broad handle, grip it tightly, and utilize it. Now, one of the things I like about my WCSKs is I put a little short lanyard on it. You stick your pinky through that lanyard, and then you grip the back edge of the knife. This particular design has like a Coke bottle, and so you grip the bottom edge. That gives me the maximum chopping capability, and it can't come out of my hand because of that finger loop. Might be something you want to add to yours. Scaling it up just to grunt, let's talk about my favorite field knife, a Kukri. Kukris are meant for this job. They have a very thick back, up to a ½ inch thick, and these are made by blacksmiths. Now let's talk about manufacturing for just a second. Modern knife makers are stock removal makers. And what that means in English is this steel comes from a factory and they're creating it and exuding it out from a molten state onto rollers, and it gets pressed down through a series of rollers to the proper thickness. Okay, so it's a sheet, like a sheet of cookies. And then the manufacturer buys one of these sheets of steel called a billet. Then that is sent to somebody who takes either a laser or a water cutter or some way and cuts out the rough shape of the knife, like a cookie cutter would cut a cookie out of a sheet of dough, and then it's ground to the final shape. Okay, this means it's stock removal. It's already there, you're just shaving off material to make this shape. Okay, this makes for a very uniform front to back all the way through, and then they're put into a kiln for heat treating, which makes it a very uniform heat treat all the way through. Okay, very good quality this way. But forged has its advantages. And you're going to hear that term in tools and things quite often. Forged. That means that they start out with a hunk of metal and they stick it in this thing. This big hammer smashes it. Remember we talked about compressing those fibers? And beats it to the shape it's supposed to be. This puts tough and soft all the way through it. It makes for a more flexible and tougher piece of steel. That's why you see hammer forged hammers, hammer forged wrenches, things like this. Impact wrenches for a vehicle, for going on sockets, are hammer forged because they're going ahead and compressing that because they're going to be under a great deal of work and pressure. Well, back in the day, blacksmiths made knives, and these Kukris that I'm showing you like there, this one is made by a blacksmith in Nepal. They call them Kamis, K-A-M-I, Kami, but it means it's a knife blacksmith. And this started out as a hunk of a leaf spring from a Mercedes-Benz, and then it was shaped like this on an anvil with a hammer and a forge to make it this way. And that means that they can control the heat treat. They can control the qualities of the steel. So these Kukris, the edge of them is very, very hard, like in the 70s, but the back of this is in the 20s. It's soft. That allows it to flex because steel is more elastic than rubber. Back when I was in college, they used to do a demonstration, and what they would do is they would take a rubber ball and a steel ball about the same size, about the size of a croquet ball, a grapefruit. And they'd go up and they'd drop both of them onto a feather pillow on the floor. Neither one would bounce because it's too soft, right? Then they'd take them and they'd move them over and over the concrete they'd drop. And that rubber ball would go 2 feet in the air and that steel ball would go about a ½ inch in the air. Concrete's too soft. Then they'd walk over and drop it onto a steel anvil, and suddenly the steel ball would go double the height of the rubber ball. because you finally got something hard enough to make it bounce. Steel is more elastic than rubber. And so in chopping, we're flexing that steel. And so the device needs to be made up from the word go to be flexible. We're going to deal with that in just a second. But since this is created by a blacksmith, it's got a very soft back and a very hard edge. Holds an edge really, really well, but it will flex for thousands and thousands and thousands of impacts. And therefore, it will hold up as a chopping tool. So that's one of the reasons I use these handmade kukris. Okay? Now this size is called a jungle pattern. It's kind of small. It's about the biggest belt knife size and still works as a light chopper. Okay? Scaling that up is my full-size kukri that I use predominantly. This is my favorite knife to utilize in the Eastern Woodlands for shelter building, fire prep, and etc. Again, it's a handmade piece of material that's coming out of Nepal, and I got mine through Gurkha House, which is Kukri House, and there's a couple others. If you'll notice this pattern, that loop right there, sometimes I'll have dots in it, like on the small one. Those dots, that appears to be some sort of trademark, for lack of a better term, in that part of the world. And so that usually indicates Gurkha House or Kukri House. So if you're looking online, look for that. Now this one is called a panel wall, which means a full tang. Not all of them are full tang. And it's got wooden handles with 2 big pins in it. I've replaced my pins with something a little bit bigger. But it's thick. This is a chopper, okay? And this does the job of a hatchet, okay? It has a straight part right here that I use very sharp as a knife edge, so I can actually cut and use this as a knife. Then this first edge right here is my primary chopping, because whenever you chop, and you're predominantly going to be chopping on round stuff, right? Limbs, sticks, stuff like that. If you'll notice, on a straight edge, when it comes in contact, look how much is actually contacting the edge to chop. It's in a straight line, correct? But a kukri, when it hits, notice how much of a curve it's got, and it's already got the weight, is past it now. So it hits and slices back toward you when you hit. And that's what makes it a very good chopper, especially on green wood. Bend the tree or the limb a little bit, put a little pressure on it, and hit it, and it just goes pop and comes apart. It just slices right through it like it's butter. So that's the reason it's my favorite field tool for shelter building and light firewood prep, because I can split wood with this. The back is soft, remember, so I can chop in there and actually take a piece of firewood and hit it like batoning, and it will, since it's a wedge shape, split real easy. So I can split wood. I can hit it and split wood. The vast majority of my fires are I just pick up off the ground, just snap it with my hand, put it against a tree, kick it, hit it once with this, and then just step on it and pop it. Minimum work. And so having a chopper like this, especially for shelter building and things like that, is a great thing. Plus this can be used as a digging tool. The tip is dull, and I grab a hold of it like this and use it as a digging tool. I can grip it like that and use it as a draw knife, so I can reduce stock to make things, etc. I can take it like a froe and put it up there with its front half, whatever, and smack it and split down wood to make boards and stuff like that from something bigger. And so it does a lot of jobs, and that's one of the reasons I use a kukri. Okay? But what if you don't want, because those run about 60, 70, 100 bucks. What if I don't want to invest something like that, but I want to try out the design? Cold steel makes a machete. Now, this is the time we need to talk about the steels, the thicknesses, and etc. This is a machete that is shaped like a kukri. Notice how thin it is. Okay, this is spring steel. It's designed for shock to flex and come back to shape. So machetes are made out of spring steel. okay? They're designed to take the hit over and over and over again. They do not hold an edge as well as some of the other steels, but they're easy to sharpen, but they don't break easy, and that's the important thing. Now, since this is a whole lot thinner than that, see, machetes get their power from speed. They're light, and if what you're going to be cutting and chopping is wrist size, inch, 2, 3 inch diameter or less, machete is perfectly viable because it gets its power from speed. How fast you pow and hit it, and then that thin cutting edge slices through it very well. This is great, especially if you're going after, like I said, small brush out west or even up north where it's light stuff. I'm just going to go up and clean up a camp. This is great for cleaning up a campsite, for shelter building, things like that. And it's not very heavy. But what's its disadvantage? Don't be banging on it or you'll compress the fibers and it'll pop. But for a chopping tool, yes, for clearing brush, for clearing a trail, and that is the heavy knife. If I'm going through thick stuff and I have to cut limbs to be able to get through it because it's so thick, a heavy knife works well for this. A kukri works well for this, but it's getting a little heavy and it'll tire your arm out. So a machete would be a better choice. And depending on where you live and the environment you live at, whether it's relatively open woodland or dense woodland, is whether or not something like this is a better choice. Now, for those people in Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, stuff like where we're down here in the semi-tropical jungle, a machete is not a bad choice at all. Small, compact, something this size, go ahead and wrap that handle because these craton handles will wear your hand out. They'll rub blisters. And so I just wrap mine with paracord to give me something in a lanyard onto it. And be able to use it as a chopper to take that brush, build shelters, and etc. Remember, it uses speed. So make sure you got a clear strike and put power to it. Always, 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 for safety, be sure that there's no way it can hit you. Never chop directly in front of you, chop to the side. Chop away from you, like this. Do not chop toward me, because if it goes through, it may come back and hit me. So always for safety, chop away from your direction. Okay, there's a tree right here, I'll step sideways and go at it sideways. So if I miss it, just rolls right on by and does not hit me. True for the kukri, true for this. Okay. Okay, staying with that idea, how about a full-size machete? A full-size machete can be another great idea for your chopping tool. So I've got a small knife that I'm going to carry for detail work. I've got a main belt knife. Now carrying this strapped to the pack for having my shelter building, my firewood gathering, etc., where it's going to be light stuff. I don't have to worry about heavy, thick stuff. Then this would be a very viable tool to have. Now I've made some modifications to mine, and I'll just share these right briefly. Right here, the full length of it to about right there, I have draw filed it and put a 90-degree spine onto my machete. This allows me to turn around backwards and do like this and shave off of bark and things like that. I can harpoon this into a stump and take a piece of fat wood and shave it and make shavings on this side, making fire building shavings, etc. The top edge up here I've rounded over so my hand grips to it. So like the kukri, I can use it as a push or pull draw knife for cleaning up limbs, de-limbing, or taking the bark off to turn it into something else. For Woodscraft, that makes it easier. This to about right here, this first 3 or 4 inches, this has been sharpened up just like my kukri to be a knife edge. That's very sharp right there. From there to here is not as sharp, but it's more of a robust edge, and that's where the 90% from there to about right there is going to be where the impacts and chopping of limbs and things like that are going to happen. My tip is relatively dull from about right there at the curve to there, because that's the grubbing edge. That's the hitting the roots on the ground that you got to cut. That's something I got to hit and bust. I use that top tip right there for that and keep my edge sharp that way. And then the back of the tip, I can turn it around backwards. Remember, I rounded that thing over and it's blunt, and that's when I'm going to hit whop and knock that rotten limb off or something like that. Something I just want to impact, knock it out of the way. I don't really want to cut it, I just hit it. If I'm cracking a big nut or something, whack, I'd use that back of that tip. See, just lay it down there and tap it. Things like that. If I got to pound in a tent stake, I'm going to use that back of that tip because it's rounded over, remember? So the full-size machete will be very viable to carry on the side of the pack or on a belt or crossways stuck into a belt for use in thick cover. Well, it's mostly grasses and vines and little friendly limbs and things like that. I just got to cut and get out of the way. And I don't really need a heavy chopper like a Kukri, but I like the idea of machete. Machete is very viable. Okay? But what if that ain't enough backbone? Well, you could carry a small shovel that's had one size edge. Now this is one of the military surplus. You see the Russian type ones, the cold steel shovels and things like that. They serve well as a chopper in the field because maybe you're doing something where you want to be digging as well. I'm wanting to, you know, dig fire pits. I'm wanting to dig out. I'm hunting something. I want to be doing digging. Taking a small shovel and edging one side, this will cut just as good as a light axe or something like that, just chopping it on the side. Whop. Works just as well. Turn around backwards to pound 10 stakes and etc. So a small shovel can serve as a shelter building device by just simply edging one side of it of a good piece of steel, like the cold steel or like these military surplus machetes, military surplus shovels. They do a good job and are very viable. I know several people, this is what they carry. They don't carry the Kukri or whatever, they carry one of these, and this is their chopping tool, digging tool, etc. So hey, it's very viable. What if you're wanting to do spoon carving or stuff where I'm wanting to hog off pretty good sized bits of wood in my processes? Well, how about a tomahawk or a small axe? We'll get to that in a minute. The advantage to the tomahawk, kind of like the machete, is it gets the bulk of its cutting power from speed. It's a long handle, and so therefore it generates a lot of whip speed for cutting. The head is relatively light, and so it's lighter than a small axe, but at the same time it cuts very well. Okay? I like the cold steel Trailhawks because it's got the hammer pole back here, which is hardened for me pounding tent stakes, hitting stuff, bust it, crack it, whatever. And you can also, with a little bit of a tap, 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 take it completely off and use this like an ulu, where you got a sharp edge where I can use it almost like a knife. There was a reason our ancestors liked these tomahawks. The heads came off easy. And so all you got to do is put the handle back in, give it a good bump, and you're back in operation. Real simple. So these can be a very viable tool in the field. And also as a chopper, as a shelter builder, things like that. Very handy. And it's a multi-tool in a way. You can take the head off. Now, the crafting size axe. A hatchet, a crafting axe. I recommend you've got a nice, big, thick handle up here because you're going to choke up on this and do detail work. I can make feather sticks. I can split down to small size. This is used a lot in crafts. Let's say I'm going to be doing spoon carving, where I'm going to draw my pattern out on. I'm going to take the limb I want and split it in half to get a flat face. And I'm going to draw out my pattern, and I'm going to use this to hog off the bolt stuff around it before I ever take my knife and start carving. So take that big inch thick piece off the side that I don't need. That's what this is for. Chop, 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 split. Okay? This also is very viable for use in firewood prep for, you know, campfires and things like that. By splitting down stuff that's a couple inches thick that I just need to split down to get to the dry center of it in case it's wet. This will be very viable. Plus it's got that hammer pole on the back for pounding in tent stakes and other things like that. This is not awkward to carry because of its size. Okay? But in your environment you may need bigger. And that's where you want to bring up a full-size axe. Now this is considered a camp axe, okay? And what that means in English is it will have about a 2-pound head and a relatively short handle. It's something that from the armpit out to the fingertips or into the palm for use as a chopping tool, canoe axe, they're sometimes called camp axe, etc. Light splitting of say 6/8 up to maybe 10-inch or so diameter, pre-cut logs, butts, ends, things like that can be done with this fairly easily. Thought I had something under my feet. And it's a good axe for light work. Yes, I could fell a tree with it and limb a tree and etc. But you really want the longer length of a handle for more power. This is the compromise where I've got the weight of the head and I've got the length, but it's still easy to carry. And that's the big thing. If I go to a full-size axe, which might be another 8 or 10 or even another 1.5 foot longer handle, that's for that, like that machete, speed and power for felling axes, splitting axes, and things like that. This is about the biggest you want to carry for a bushcraft, woodcraft axe. And you guys up north that are in snow country, where you need wood to get through the night. You don't need no little limbs. You need split wood to get through a cold night. That's where something like this comes in very viable, where you can bring down a small tree, buck it up into usable pieces, and pile that up to burn for the all-night fire. So you may want to consider getting one of these big choppers. The number one thing to consider: what is your skill level? What is your comfort level of how much I want to tote in weight, bulk, awkwardness, etc. And what kind of work am I doing? Am I doing shelter building to practice debris shelters, things like that? Well, one of the light little machetes or one of the big knives may serve your purpose well. How about I'm wanting to do carving and stuff like that? Then I may want to get a small crafting axe like this and utilize it for the splitting of the wood, etc., to do my crafts with and to process some firewood. I'm mostly around scrub and bushes and stuff like that, and I really just need to be able to get a path through it. Then again, the light kukri, or maybe a regular kukri, or a machete. There's a reason you see these in the tropics, because of the thick jungles and stuff like that, where it's not anything, but it's just a lot of little stuff. And I can go pop, 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 and just hardly any effort, using the length and thin and the speed to tap, 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 and pop them little limbs out of the way to make a path through here so I can get through easily. Also, I can hit a couple of little saplings, bring it down to make my little tripod, my chair, my shelter, my table, my whatever. This is very viable for that. And then, like I said, a shovel may serve your purposes. These are very viable to use as a chopping tool as well as a digging tool. And so it's multitasking that way. There's a lot of things you can do with one of these once you figure out, the different tips and tricks. And then finally, of course, the full-size axes and things. Whenever you're carrying one of these, we're going camping and I'm planning on processing quite a bit of firewood. If I'm going to do something that this can't handle it, we are no longer camping, we're constructing something. And we now need full-size axes, big old saws, and stuff like that, because we're cabin building, or we're building a lean-to shelter, or we're whatever. In which case, it stopped being just a little weekend thing, and now we're making construction. And so that's when you start hauling in the big stuff. And in the next video, we're going to talk about saws and how they play into this. They go hand in hand, because a small light saw can mean I don't have to tote a chopper for shelter building or whatever. Just a folding silky saw or a Baco Laplander can serve in that. But if I need to split wood, the light choppers may do. So like I said, we're getting into a gray area. We came out of the belt knife, and now it kind of branches out into a tree of what is your situation and what task are you planning on doing. You don't have to do one and done. Suppose I want to go with a heavy knife to supplement my small belt knife. or I want to carry a real small, light little Eldris or something as my primary bushcraft knife, and then I just want to get a bigger, heavier knife for the chopping knife, splitting knife, the one that this won't quite do the job and this does the job. Perfectly viable. Go with that. Or, on the other hand, I'm wanting to get into primitive shelters and things like that. Do I need to tote a saw with a light chopper, or do I prefer to just take a heavy chopper and one hit take it to the ground? For me, that job is served by a small saw and a kukri, because with this I can do anything up to a small axe. I can do anything up to that canoe axe with this in my skill level, and it's got to be your skill level. That's the thing. But between this and a small saw and my other knives, 99% of my stuff is taken care of. I can build shelters, I can split firewood, I can shave down to the good wood when everything's wet to get to the dry stuff to start it. I can make tents, pegs, I can make tables, I can make chairs, I can make beds, I can make roofs, I can make whatever with a chopping tool in my skill level. And so you have to find what is your skill level and what are your requirements, and have the tool match that. Hope you've enjoyed this, guys. In next month's installment, we'll go into saws and talk about the job that saws play in woodcraft. Thank you very much for supporting my channel. Until next time, guys, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.